Hi guys! Sorry I've been a bit absent from booktube recently. Fourth year has kind of taken over my life, so I've been busy doing dissertation work and all that kind of stuff. But I felt really inspired by a tag I was watching earlier, so I decided to give it a go. This is a book cake tag which was created by SUDDENLYLORNA a couple of years ago. I thought this would be quite an appropriate tag to do, seeing as I do actually have a cake in the oven right now. The first ingredient is self-raising flour, which is a book which started slow and then really picked up, and for this one I am going with Tipping the Velvet by Sarah Waters. This book starts in the protagonist's sort of sleepy seaside hometown, and that kind of bit I found was a bit slow. I mean, I still enjoyed it, but it was nothing compared to the pace of the rest of the book. Once she moves to London, that's suddenly like bam, it's like go 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 from there on in, and then you look back and you realise how slow the start was. Actually thinking about it now, I'm wondering if this is maybe a kind of intentional thing that Sarah Waters did, where the pace reflected the location that they were in at the time, which is actually very clever, and I didn't necessarily notice that when I was reading it. So the next one is Butter, which is a book with a really rich, intense plot. My Butter book is Tender Morsels by Margot Lanigan, which I just finished a few days ago after weeks of ploughing through it, because it was, as Butter would suggest, it was good, it was rich, but it required a lot of digestion. This one was a retelling of Snow White and Rose Red, which I mentioned in my London bookshop crawl haul. I really need to stop referring to that because it's impossible to say. Though it's a retelling, it actually expands on it quite a lot. Before I started reading it, I went over the original fairy tale once more just so that I could remember it, because it's been a long time since I read that particular fairy tale. And the concluding point of the fairy tale, which is when like the bear eats the dwarf, actually only came halfway through in Tender Morsels, so when it got to that point I was kind of like, oh, what happens for the rest of this? What happens for the next 200 pages if this is the end of the fairy tale here? And actually I found that it got really interesting from that point onwards, because the start is mainly, you can kind of see how it relates to the original fairy tale, but after that it kind of goes in its own direction, which I thought was really fascinating. There's a whole system of magic that becomes like clearer and clearer. I also thought the world building in this book was absolutely amazing. Not only is there one world, but there is actually two, and they are parallel. One is like the dream world and one is reality. And I thought it was really interesting to sort of read about the interplay between the two and how they connected and how these characters were transitioning between the two and how they dealt with that. The third ingredient is Eggs, which is a book you had reservations about but actually ended up really enjoying. So for this one I've gone with Daughter of Smoke and Bone by Laini Taylor, which I don't have a physical copy of because I read it on my tablet. I'd heard really good things about this book, but I'm not generally a huge fan of YA because I feel like sometimes it's not quite as complex. It's more about having a good pace in YA than it is necessarily about lots of deeper layers. But this one I actually found was quite layered, and it plays a lot with like creation mythology. There's two breeds which are kind of in opposition to each other throughout this book, which are the Chimera, which is the race that the main character is a member of, and then there's also the Angels. They're engaged in this lifelong battle with the Chimera, and I thought that was really interesting. I'm generally not a huge fantasy fan. It needs to be quite accessible for me to get into it, just because I'm really not experienced in that genre. This was a really easy read, so I feel like that kind of eased me into the fantasy elements of it, and I just thought it was really good fun, and I can't wait to read the rest of the series. The next ingredient before we put the cake in the oven is Sugar, which is a book that you thought was really sweet. So for this one I have gone for Tell the Wolves I'm Home by Carol Rivka Brunt. I read this one in summer last year and I absolutely fell for it. Like, it was one of my favourite books of the year. I thought it was really touching, it's really heartbreaking. Basically the book is about the AIDS crisis in the 1980s and how that affects one family, in particular the protagonist, who is a teenage girl called June, who has lost her uncle, who is also her best friend, to AIDS, and it's about how she deals with that and her coping mechanisms, and I just thought it was really sad, but it was really touching and I could really get on board with the characters, so my heart was just constantly breaking for them. I also thought the relationships in this book were pretty damn good as well, especially between June and her sister Greta. So on one hand you've got June, who is really upset about this and thinks it's an absolute tragedy that her uncle has died, and then her sister Greta, who's a bit less sure about it. She's, you know, got this kind of internalised homophobia thing going on, so she's kind of like, I don't want to think about it. She puts up these barriers, and it's really interesting to see how the two kind of grow together, and Greta learns to like break down and be more open about her emotions. This is one of the most realistic sibling relationships that I've ever read in any fiction. After the cake has been in the oven, we need to ice it, and The Icing is a book which contains all the elements that you really like to read. I have chosen The Book of Lost Things by John Connolly. This is actually a retelling of several fairy tales that are all kind of mashed together in one fantastical world. It's really, really twisted and somewhat gruesome at times, but it's also quite historically informed. So it takes place around World War II, and this family who sort of have had to move to the countryside to escape the bombings. So their son David escapes to this fantasy world, which is only real to him but nobody else can get in, and I think that's a really interesting way of exploring how children kind of escaped the horrors of the war. I mean, it's something that C.S. Lewis did with Narnia as well, you know, evacuees, they go off and find this magical world. Book of Lost Things is kind of similar in that respect, but it's so much better. It's so much better. I thought that David was a really, really interesting character, and it was amazing to see how he developed throughout the book and how he matured, because at the start he's got a baby brother who he absolutely resents because his dad has had a kid with another woman, and he thinks, had enough of this, I'm going off to my own world now. But actually he grows up a lot as the book goes on, and in the end it comes to like a life or death situation where he has to save his brother, and he has no reluctance about that whatsoever, which I thought was quite realistic as well. That's how a lot of people feel when they have new baby siblings, so I thought that was an interesting touch. It made me laugh, it made me cry, it made me want to be there and be solving all these riddles that David was having to solve, and yeah, just generally loved this book. Now that The Icing is on, you have to add the sprinkles, and this is a book or a book series which you return to for a wee pick-me-up when you're feeling down. I know a lot of people will probably say Harry Potter for this, but personally, when I'm feeling down, I can't really concentrate on paragraphs of text, so I have to have something quite visual, something quite light-hearted. So for this reason, I have chosen two books which I actually would consider as my literary sprinkles. The first of these books is Hyperbole and a Half by Ali Brosh. This book is based on her popular blog, which I read for quite a while before I bought the book, all about not only sort of her childhood adventures but also her struggles with depression. And yeah, I just thought it was really, really moving, but it's tied up in this, you know, cute, cartoony, really, really funny package, so that's something I like to dip in and out of if I'm feeling a bit low. The second one is also a picture book, and that is Plum Dog by Emma Chichester Clark, which again is a book based on a blog by the author. It's made up of diary entries from the dog's perspective, which I thought was quite an interesting way of telling the story. So yeah, it's easy. If you just want to dip into it, then you can just read one page at a time. I mean, when I first read this, I read it all in a oneer, because you read one page and you think, just one more, and then you keep saying that and eventually the book is finished. I'm just going to try and find my favourite page here, which always gives me a good laugh. Yeah, so this is my favourite page here. As you can see, the art style is really nice. It's all kind of hand illustrated watercolours. It's really pretty. But this is Plum the Dog's diary entry from Wednesday the 20th of August. When Liffey and I are together, people always ask, how do you tell them apart? And Emma says, well, Liffey is smaller and her coat is more glossy and she has a little white bit on her chest. But I think the differences between us are obvious. Liffey is the good one who does as she's told, and I am the one who doesn't actually give a shit. The last book in the book cake is The Cherry on Top, and this is your favourite book of the year. I'm actually going to cheat on that one because I have 3 favourite books of the year. They're all from different categories of book, so I feel like I can get away with it. My favourite novel of the year is The Humans by Matt Haig, which I'd heard amazing things about all over BookTube, but I hadn't really considered picking it up myself until I saw it in the library, and I just thought, it's quite short, it looks like an easy read, everyone's been saying it's amazing, I might as well just borrow it. I absolutely adored it. Like, I would read it again in a heartbeat. It's kind of a strange book, but it's really gentle, and it just feels like Matt Haig is giving you a hug through the paper. It's all about an alien who comes to Earth and how he's learning about humanity and how families work and how society works, and it's really interesting to see how human life is sort of viewed from an alien perspective. You realise that actually we do a lot of weird stuff that you wouldn't necessarily be able to explain. It moved me to tears, it made me laugh, it just generally made me want to give humanity a big hug. The next book in my favourite books of the year list is one that I have already mentioned in probably many other videos. I can't even remember how many videos I've mentioned this in. That is Rental Heart by Christie Logan. Not only is the language beautiful in this short story collection, but as I've mentioned in some of my previous videos, I read it at a time where I really needed comfort, and it just provided that for me. And yeah, I'm just forever grateful for the existence of this book. Finally, my favourite non-fiction book of the year is Girls Will Be Girls by Emer O'Toole. This book is so intelligent, but it's also just so funny and filled with personal anecdotes that will make you laugh out loud, but also kind of despair a little bit. Even though I read this as a staunch feminist, and I kind of went in with the view of, I think I'm already going to know a lot of the things that she discusses in this book, I actually found that there was a lot of content that I hadn't necessarily thought about before, and it really heightened my awareness of how gender is performative. Every young woman should read this, but every other person as well. So there you go, that is my book cake. Hopefully it tastes nice, as does my real cake, which has just come out of the oven. Now this is a tag, but it's been on the go for 2 years. Hardly anyone's done it. So I tag Jen, I tag Mercedes, I tag Holly, and I tag Marie at Marie Berg. Well, I can't wait to see what goes into your book cakes. Bye!